Ever since Fractal released the Terra in 2022, I wanted to get one. And now I finally pulled the trigger. Today we'll be downsizing my existing PC into the Fractal Terra, cutting the case volume nearly in half, going from roughly 19 liters down to about 10. Now, there are definitely cases with better airflow and more efficient layouts, but to me, the Terra is simply the best looking ITX case on the market, especially in the Jade color. We'll try to work around its thermal limitations, but first I have to take apart my old system. Like most small form factor cases, this Fractal Node 304 is based on an ITX motherboard, but at almost double the volume of the Terra. Still, we'll be able to keep most of my existing parts. Thanks to the long-term support of AM4, I will be reusing the GIGABYTE B450 motherboard I bought back in 2019, almost 7 years ago. It comes with the Ryzen 5800X as the CPU, which is paired with 32 GB of DDR4 RAM. For the GPU, I got an ASRock 9060 XT 16GB last year, and despite being too tall for the Terra, according to Fractal, it will actually fit just fine. So in the end, I only have to swap a few parts to make this work. The first change will be the CPU cooler. I went with the ID Cooling IS77 XT, which is the biggest CPU cooler you can fit in this case, alongside the Noctua NHL12S/77. The Noctua is great as well, but it's double the price and actually a little bit worse in terms of thermals, as this video by Machines & More has shown. The IS77 XT is right at the limit for a chip as hot as the 5800X, so ideally you'd want a more efficient CPU with a lower TDP for a case like this, but we'll make it work. The second change will be our power supply. For this case, we'll have to go with a smaller SFX unit. I chose Corsair's SF750, one of the most trusted SFX units for small form factor builds. It offers excellent performance with pretty much silent operation and great reliability. On top of that, it comes with very nice sleeved cables that are more flexible than your typical PSU cables. And this will make life much easier when it comes to cable management in a cramped case like this. On the bottom of the case, we will also be adding a slim 120mm exhaust fan to help manage the heat a little bit better. So here we go, my first PC build in 6 years. We'll start by prepping the motherboard before moving on to the case. As you can see, I was struggling quite a bit with the provided thermal paste, as I wanted to stick to its tube more than anything else really. Eventually, I managed to get it onto the CPU using the 5-dot method. And yeah, in hindsight, I probably used a bit much. However, tests have shown that the amount doesn't matter that much as long as you achieve good coverage. With the CPU cooler, it's especially important to screw down tightly until you feel strong resistance at the design's stopping point. This will ensure optimal heat transfer. And now that the motherboard is ready to go, let's start prepping the case. Since I'm going with a CPU cooler of 77mm in height, I have to use the adjustable spine in position 1. This will allow maximum space for the CPU cooler. But before we do anything else, we'll install the case fan. A regular case fan is possible here, but using a slim fan allows for more room for the PSU cables, and the difference in airflow is not that big. So I went with the slim option to make my life a little bit easier. We'll install it in exhaust orientation, as that has been found to be most effective in this case. Once the fan is mounted, the fan cable can be tucked away below the motherboard and the motherboard goes on top. At this point we can plug in all of the motherboard connectors, so our 24-pin, our 8-pin CPU power as well as our case I/O. And this is where I realized my motherboard actually doesn't have a port for the USB-C header. But luckily there are adapters to go from the 9-pin USB to a USB-C header. This way I'll be able to use the front USB-C port, although only at USB 2.0 speeds, but that's better than nothing. Once all the cables are plugged in, it's time to take off the PSU bracket. I'll be using the smaller standoffs that come with the Terra just to create a little gap for me to route my GPU power cable through. Next, we'll plug all of our cables into the PSU side, so in my case the motherboard connector, the CPU connector, as well as one 8-pin PCIe connector for the GPU. Once all the cables are somewhat in place, it's time to screw the PSU down. For cable management, I'll be using Velcro cable ties to make everything neat and tidy and ensure best possible airflow for our case fan. The sleeved PSU cables really made this part a lot easier. They are easily tucked away into small gaps along the side of the case. Finally, it's time to install the GPU through the riser cable that comes with the case. Because I am using the spine in position 1 to make room for the CPU cooler, I am limited to a dual slot GPU, making my ASRock 9060 XT a perfect fit. And with the cable management done, the only thing left to do now is put all the panels back on and test the performance. So first we'll do a stress test running both Cinebench and Firmark simultaneously to push both the CPU and GPU to their limits. Since the 5800X really needs it, I went with a -15 all-core curve optimizer, which I think should be stable for most people. So basically applying a slight undervolt to reduce heat. I also adjusted the fan curves in fan control to my liking in favor of noise reduction. So after running both stress tests for a while, at 21 degrees room temperature, the GPU sits at a comfortable 66 degrees while pulling nearly 190 watts with a fan speed of 40 to 45%, so absolutely no issues here. However, as expected, the CPU fan is running at 100% speed, achieving 85 degrees, with the CPU pulling up to 145 watts. Now, while 85 degrees sounds hot, it's actually still 5 degrees below the TJ max of 90 degrees for this CPU, so at normal room temperatures, this CPU and cooler combination shouldn't thermal throttle. And this is what it sounds like under full load during the stress test. It's obviously really audible, but at least it's a lower frequency hum. When running Monster Hunter Wilds at 4K FSR performance with frame generation on, the GPU is unchanged at 100% utilization. The CPU, however, sits at a maximum of 71 degrees with a fan speed of 40 to 50%, therefore running much quieter and cooler. And here's how that sounds. So, am I satisfied with the build? Absolutely. It's definitely not the coolest running system, but it looks great and it handles everything I throw at it just fine. So if you're after a compact, beautiful case and you're willing to be thoughtful about thermals, the Terra is hard to beat in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts below and thanks for watching.